as some of you know who come regularly to our programs, one of the main things we try to do is celebrate good journalism. And that's what we're doing tonight in a premium sort of way. We have two very distinguished journalists, two accomplished journalists. Before I got to know them and their work, I would have introduced them as two podcasters. That's like introducing Tom Brokaw as a broadcaster. These are good news people who happen to do podcasts. First, senior producer for In the Dark is Samara Freemark. She has her BA from Swarthmore and her MA from the University of Michigan in urban planning. So if you aspire to a career in podcasting, be sure and go to the University of Michigan and get your urban planning degree.
Absolutely.
And then the person who moved to Mississippi full-time for a year and who was the lead reporter on this podcast and the host for the program is Madeleine Baran. And they both have graciously agreed to come here. Madeleine got her degree, master's degree at New York University in journalism. Way to go, Madeleine. And also French studies, which I'm sure was in great demand in Winona as you were doing your investigation. This really is remarkable, this podcast. Now, I'm an old print guy, but I do know how to access podcasts. And so I listened to all 11 episodes, and I was transfixed. This is really in-depth investigative reporting, a series of 11 programs that last for about an hour. Unlike paid television, where everything's exactly a certain time, one segment might be 56 minutes, another might be 48. It's just how the story plays out. I want them to tell the story of that. I want to say, welcome back to Mississippi. And maybe the best way to just get started is to show a little something, a trailer, so people can get a sense of it.
Sure, so I'm gonna take this and try to walk over here. I'm gonna play just a couple minute video trailer we have. Hopefully this will work.
And thank you all so much for coming.
Yes, thank you.
It's great to see so many people.
Okay, let's see how this goes. Hold on.
In February of last year, I got an email from a woman in Mississippi. She wrote that there was a man there named Curtis Flowers who'd been tried 6 times for the same crime. The evidence is iffy at best, she wrote. The man didn't have a chance.
Curtis Giovanni Flowers murdered those 4 people. There's no doubt in my mind. And I think he needs to fry in hell where he's going.
If he was executed, would you go watch?
You damn right I'd go watch. I will stick the needle in him.
10 minutes after it happened, they zeroed in on Curtis and never looked nowhere else.
I mean, it's hard to trust this investigation. It's hard to trust the people who ran it, and it's hard to trust the prosecution trying this case. Hey, where are the facts? Where's the proof?
Mississippi, Mississippi. You know, we all know what goes on in Mississippi. Once we get you in the courtroom, you ours. If you're black, we got you.
They'll keep going on until they get inside your head to make you think that he really had something to do with it.
Did I lead you to say anything? Was your statement free and voluntary?
Yes. If you try a man 6 times for the same crime, then something is wrong about the entire system.
So are you confident that you have the right person, that Curtis Flowers is guilty?
That I will answer definitely. No question at all.
So that gives you a flavor of the 11-part series. I'd like to ask, to begin with, Madeleine, how you came to this subject, and then explain how your approach.
Yeah, so I've been reporting on the criminal justice system for a while as an investigative reporter, but this story idea was just an email that we got one day. So after the first season of our show, In the Dark, we asked the public for tips, and we got many, hundreds, more than 1,000 tips. And this was maybe the shortest one, or one of the shortest. It was maybe 3 lines or something, and it just said, there's this, I live in this part of Mississippi, there's this man here named Curtis Flowers. I think he might be innocent, but he didn't have a chance. And he'd been tried 6 times. And so as a reporter, you get a lot of tips, and they're not always of great quality. So, a lot of times you'll get a tip like that, and you'll think like, wow, that's 6 trials, that's crazy. But then you look it up, and you're like, oh, it wasn't really 6. Or, the tip like that is pretty common, where it looks good at first, but it's not really 100% true. But it was true, which didn't take, of course, long to figure out. But then from there, what we did was we spent several months, before we even really dove in on the project, doing some initial reporting to make sure that it was something that was worth spending, as long as we ended up spending on it. But for us, I think what was so striking was, was the 6 trials. Who gets tried 6 times? And, if you're a family member of the victims, who has to sit through 6 trials, where you listen to the medical examiner, you listen to all the evidence, and what happened to the person you loved? What's going on with the prosecutor who decides to try a case 6 times, or has the case reversed as many times as this DA has? So for us, it combined a number of really big questions that we look for in a story, because we're not really interested in just doing like a crime story or something like that. We're interested in stories that hold powerful people and institutions accountable. And so we thought that in this story, a few months into the initial reporting, it was clear that one of the main themes here was the power of a prosecutor. And the role of race in the criminal justice system. And so there was this need with this case to look institutionally at what was going on. Like you mentioned, we moved down here because that was really the only way, if we're going to do the story, we could do it right.
And so as we begin to unravel this story, Samara, help us understand the team that you brought down here.
Yeah, so we're very lucky. So we work with an organization called APM Reports, which is an investigative team based in Minnesota, out of Minnesota Public Radio. And we have, In the Dark, we actually have a team of 5 full-time people who work only on the podcast, which is amazing. Plus we have data reporters and editors and music people we can pull in for help. So our team is made up of Madeleine, who's the lead producer and lead reporter and host. Myself, I'm the senior producer, and then we have 2 other producers and another reporter. And then, as I said, we have some other resources as well, which is, I think we're constantly aware of how rare a situation is like that, to have so many people and so much time to devote to one story. But I think for this story, it would have been very difficult to tell this story in a real way with a smaller team, with less time, with less resources devoted to it. It's just such a complicated story, and there was so much going on. It was very, very complex and hard to figure out. And so having that team was crucial to actually being able to do the reporting we did.
And to be able to go beyond just Curtis's case, which is a large enough question what was going on there, but to be able to do some of the jury analysis that we did, where we have people that we, on our team, we can devote months to just getting records and things like that. So
there's always different ways for investigative reporters to get into a story and then flesh it out. Describe your modus operandi.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at Samara because I'm I feel like someone else better understands you. I'm like, what is my...
Well, I will start. I know this is a question for Madeleine, but
no,
I'll give you a little assist.
Uh-huh.
So we do, like she said, we spend multiple months just doing a baseline level of reporting on several stories to see which is the right story for us. And within those months, reporting the story for a couple of months from Minnesota, you scratch the surface and you figure out kind of the basics of what's going on. But more importantly, it kicks up a lot of questions. And so our reporting is just always driven by questions.
Yeah, and so we'll have with this, we have a couple basic things we need to make sure are true. Like we were talking earlier, so it's has he been tried 6 times? Is there evidence, really excellent evidence of guilt that hasn't been, for whatever reason, introduced at trial? In other words, is this just a interesting kind of procedural situation with 6 trials, but actually there's no chance of actual innocence? So there were some basic things that we looked for. But beyond that, once we get into the story, we're creating a reporting plan that we're always revising. So we don't rely on any like one reporting method more than others. I mean, I think as you can like hear in the podcast, we exhaust multiple ways of trying to figure out something. So whether that's trying to find documents everywhere we can, or trying to find people who might know something we can talk to. I think if there's one thing that characterizes our work, it would be the exhaustive quality of it. So everybody on the team is committed to like finding all of the people in this category of 150 people, or trying to reach every single possible juror. So we identify areas that are important, and then we commit to trying to talk to all of the people in those categories. And then with all reporting projects, you really have to be open to what happens when you're reporting, because you really just have this idea or this thing that's interesting to you, but you don't really know where it's going to lead. And so with Curtis's case, one of the places that led us was this decision to look at all of the jury strikes in this judicial district. But that wasn't something that we started out with a plan to do. It was more like being in that area, reading about these other trials, feeling very strongly this probably was not close to an anomaly, the fact that Curtis had mostly tried by all white or nearly white jurors.
But maybe not everybody in the audience knows what a jury strike is.
Right.
You want to talk about that?
Jury strike is a thing you want to have happen to you if you don't want to serve on a jury.
Talk about that, and then the exhaustive thing that you did to go through.
Yeah, so I'm guessing many people in this room have been called for jury duty, right? Like I have, I don't know.
Most
raise your hand if you've been called for
been
jury duty.
Mostly students, they probably have not.
Okay. Yeah, so when you're selected for a jury, you're called for jury duty. They go through a bunch of things to determine if you're eligible to be on a jury, like are you old enough? And are you also the prosecutor? Do you have a massive conflict of interest where the judge is going to say there's no way you can be on this jury? Beyond that, you get into this thing called peremptory strikes, where both sides get to strike people off the jury, and they don't have to give a reason. They're just people they want to get rid of. The one big reason you cannot strike someone is because of their race. And so what we were finding in this DA's district, the 5th Judicial District in Mississippi, was that his office was striking Black people off of the juries at a rate 4.5 times that of white people. And that was not just the Curtis Flowers case, that was across more than 200 trials over more than 20 years. So what we did to get that information, it would be great if you could just request that. And I think one of the reasons we spend so much time on the podcast showing how hard it is to get this is because we think it's important for people to realize that this wasn't easy to get this number. You think it might be a number that the public might want to be able to access, but it's not. So there's no one who tracks this, who tracks like the race of the jurors, the race of jurors getting struck. So a reporter that we work with, Parker Yesko, went to all the 8 courthouses in this judicial district and scanned, with help from a couple other people on our team, more than 115,000 pages. And then many people on the team then worked on, and those were all of the jury. So we went to looking for all of the trials in Doug Evans' district, the DA. Problem is that nobody keeps track of how many trials took place. So first of all, Parker had to figure out how many trials have happened in this area since 1992 when Doug Evans became the district attorney. So she's going through all these handwritten docket books that all the clerks have at all the 8 courthouses, and also trying to dig up any other trials that maybe are in the back of someone's mind that are in a different docket book. So she ends up with 418 total trials. Then she goes and gets all of the records she can from all of those. And then it was a little more than 200 of those trials where we had enough information to include them in the data analysis that our data reporter did. So our data reporter, Will Kraft, took all this stuff from Parker, and then he spent months working with people on our team to put all that information into, to do basically data entry and take, every single juror where we knew the race of that juror and make that juror a line of data, and do this for more than 200 trials, and then look at the voir dire transcripts to see, okay, let's do some deeper analysis to see if maybe, this racial disparity goes away if you adjust for any number of factors, knowing a member of law enforcement, being a victim of a crime, whatever it is. And so Will spent months doing that, and then he came up with this finding after he analyzed this data of this rate of 4.5 times. So this one number that this DA's office was striking Black people from juries at a rate 4.5 times that of white people is it's one line in a story, but it took almost a year to get that one line in one place. And so I think hopefully one of the things that the podcast can do is kind of highlight like types of information that we think maybe the public should have access to, and show that often we do not, and it would not be that hard to have a system where we could get that data when it's coming in and collect it. So I think one of the things we're able to do is to kind of show that work. And I think a lot of listeners are just kind of as frustrated often as we are when we find out, and show in the podcast these moments of finding out, like, what? We have to go, like, no one wrote this down. No one even knows how many trials there are here. Okay, fine. I guess Parker will go figure that out. But
So
yeah.
the data mining is really a phenomenal part of your investigation, but what was so transfixing were your interviews with actual people. And in listening to the podcast, the impression is that you did a better job of talking to witnesses and potential suspects than the law enforcement officers did. Mm-hmm. Is that an accurate assumption?
I think we have different goal.
Mm-hmm.
I think you see that really clearly in this case, where, at least judging on what many of the people who were questioned by law enforcement told us, law enforcement was not coming to them asking questions like, who did you see that day? What was going on the day of the murders? They were coming to them saying, did you see this specific person in the morning walking by? So it's very different in terms of what people were asking. We're also in a different situation because on the one hand, obviously we don't have the ability to we can't subpoena someone. And we also don't seem like cops. If the cop comes and questions you, that's a very intense situation where the cop actually has a lot of authority and ability to help you, harm you. There's a whole really involved actual power dynamic. With the reporter there is, but we don't have that other dimension. We're not law enforcement. And especially when we're talking about communities where law enforcement has really harmed communities, it's very helpful to not.
That was a plus for you then.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case in particular, one of the challenges was because people had really negative experiences being questioned about this case, one of the very first things we said when we knocked on the door would be someone would answer and we'd say, we're not lawyers. So no offense to lawyers, but it's just the first thing we said, because it's we're not with either side that keeps coming and asking questions, because people had a range of, they didn't want to get caught up in it, I guess is the main thing I could say. They didn't want to be subpoenaed. And it wasn't even necessarily anything negative about either side. It was just if you're living in a town, you don't get to choose that your house is near a crime scene or you may have seen someone walk by. And so, especially in a case that has been unresolved for so long, people are hesitant to want to insert themselves in that.
And we try to be really sensitive about that. That poses a challenge to us because people are. This is not the first time they've been asked about this. They don't have positive feelings about being asked about this case necessarily, and so we had to always be very careful, very aware of what people were going through and how we were going to approach them and how we were going to present ourselves in those situations.
And I think because we really don't care, we don't need the facts to be a certain way. We don't need Curtis to be innocent. We don't need Curtis to be guilty. And so we're interviewing in a different way just by the nature of our job than some other people who've interviewed in the case. It's the job of, the prosecutor who's got these people that are witnesses to keep them as witness. He needs them to stay witnesses and to not, start thinking maybe I didn't really see that or something. And then the defense is not looking for evidence that their client is guilty or, they're looking. So us being kind of in a different role, I think was helpful. And then just being there for so long too. So a lot of people, we thought a lot about when we would talk to certain people. And one of the things we really looked at was, who should we just kind of hold off on and instead let them sort of get to know us? Because living and being in this small town, it's we were going to football games, we were going to church, we were doing all these things so people could kind of get comfortable with us before we even asked them if they wanted to be interviewed.
Talk about how you were received when you first entered Winona.
Well, you spent a lot more time there than I did, but like you said, it's a small town. It's a town where a lot of people know each other. I think maybe I'll let you answer this question.
Yeah, so it's very racially divided. So, I'm guessing some people here have been in Winona, or just this is a case that your views on this case break very much along racial lines. Not entirely, but very much. And so, if you're a reporter showing up in a town to ask questions about this case, well, if you think he's guilty, then you're not really that into the idea of like people that are coming to report on a guy who should have been convicted like 6 trials ago. On the other hand, if you don't think he's guilty, or you think, I don't know if he's guilty or not, but I maybe think something wrong happened here, or it deserves some digging, then you're kind of into this idea of here are some reporters here that are trying to take a look at this. So it was very different depending on who we were talking to. Many people were so welcoming and helpful, and and I think that was, especially as we got like past like even the first couple of weeks, then we're into the first couple of months, and all of a sudden it's like we were talking earlier, it's we sort of gradually interview like everyone in one family, and it's like, oh, first it's like, oh, that's your daughter-in-law. We talked to her yesterday. It's like, wait, that's your daughter-in-law's cousin. And you're like, wait, that's your daughter-in-law's cousin's niece. And you're like, I just need a family tree, because clearly I just need to interview everyone in this family, because, so like the kind of just small town like nature of this, it's like, it was very easy to find people, or at least get leads on where people are, versus like the days of reporting we had in like Jackson, where like any bigger city, it's like the neighbor doesn't know who was their next door neighbor 4 neighbors ago. But in the smaller town, like maybe that neighbor doesn't, but someone will. So we really were grateful for how welcoming many people were to us in the town. And
even people who weren't necessarily excited about what we were there to do were still generous with their time. Like the victims' families talked to us, a lot of people in the victims' families, which we were very grateful for. So that was really important to talk to them.
So Southern politeness prevailed.
Well,
not altogether.
I mean, look, if you have a town of 4,000 people and there's been a quadruple murder that's been tried 6 times, that's an intense situation. So that is like, it would be strange if that was not a complex situation for everyone involved. So you add to that as a reporter coming in. So I think that only highlights those same issues. But I do think that hopefully what we're able to do is present this case in a different way, and explore some of the things that maybe haven't been explored yet in this case in a way that is of interest to people. I know that it's of interest to people in Winona. I've talked to many people who've listened to it there. So I think that it was really just important to be down here because of just the sheer amount of time that a lot of this reporting takes. I mean, we don't show all that in the podcast because it would get very boring. Like here's the 8th time we went by, some route witness's house and they're still not home, or like here's, the 12 houses we went to that they didn't live at, and then it turned out they did live at the first one, or whatever, it's like, but every person has like a little story like that, and so it was time consuming in a way that most projects I think that I've done have not been, where there are very few really easy things happening in the story, from the very beginning of there's not one trial, there's 6, to even really small things like just trying to locate a couple key people who moved around quite a lot for not moving around very far, but just often in like a 6-block radius. There was one man who we spent months trying to find, who is the only person in Winona who's like legitimately homeless. And so everyone would tell us, he's just around, like I just saw him. Like, you just saw him, like where? And how long ago? 15 minutes ago. And it's like, okay, where is he? He's under that tree. Great. And like we leave that interview, he's gone. And we spent, we weren't working on this straight, but in a small town, like we spent months and months trying to find this one person until one day he was like lying down on a bench outside of the Dollar General store. We're like, there he is. So everything like that took a long time. And then while we're there as well, I mean, what's really important is that there's like the people that we know we need to talk to, but then there's the really important question of what is actually going on here. So when we talk about like the dynamics with law enforcement coming to talk to these witnesses, what did the witnesses see? How did they feel about being approached by law enforcement? How did that relate to the history of law enforcement and race in that area? Those are the kind of things that just take a lot of time to be able to get right and to be detailed about it.
Yeah, I mean, when we started this reporting project, we did not realize it was going to take us as long as it did. I think we thought it would take us maybe 2 months of on-the-ground reporting. And then it just turned out that everything was so much more complicated, and finding people was so much more complicated, and the story was just so complex. it expanded, and we're very lucky to have editors who were willing to greenlight that expansion.
Mm-hmm. So after a year of investigation, is there a simple explanation for why Curtis Flowers was tried 6 different times?
Because the DA could. That's what he wanted to do.
Because
the DA could do that, and he decided to do it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, not to be like trite about it, but that's how powerful he is, because he wanted to.
And for the non-lawyers in the audience, my granddaughter asked me today, what about double jeopardy?
Yeah.
So can you explain that?
Yeah, so double jeopardy, if you are tried and you're acquitted, you cannot be tried again. But Curtis has never been acquitted. So Curtis has been found guilty 4 times and a hung jury twice. And so if you're found guilty, you can appeal, you can win your appeal, and the prosecutor can just try you again. You can win your appeal, the prosecutor can try you again. Most of the time, you either don't keep winning appeals, or the prosecutor might not keep trying you again. So in Curtis's case, you have this sort of extraordinary circumstance where he kept winning his appeals. Like the higher courts kept saying, these trials are not fair. This DA violated the Constitution. You deserve a new trial. And the prosecutor said, okay, and he just tries him again, sometimes engaging in the exact same misconduct that the state Supreme Court found he had engaged in the previous trial. Goes back up to the state Supreme Court. They say, yeah, when that was a problem before, it's still a problem now. The conviction's been overturned. But the crazy thing is that there's no, it's just like a wheel that keeps turning, and there's no person that says, hold on, stop. You can't actually just go and do this whole thing again.
Right, because from the perspective of the criminal justice system, the remedy has been applied.
Right.
He got another trial. But the problem is he's in jail this whole time. He never gets out. So
he's been in Parchman 21 years.
Well, jail or Parchman. He gets.
Yeah, and this state Supreme Court justice we interview, including the podcast, Oliver Diaz, on the one hand says, look, these trials are really unfair as part of, I think, at least one of the courts that overturned a conviction. And he talked about the race discrimination that was taking place in jury selection. So we had that conversation, but then he said, this is a success. This shows the justice system is working. Because here's this guy, when the trial was not fair, the court listened, and the court agreed with him. And we had this kind of mind-bending conversation where I said, well, but he's been in jail or prison. He said, well, when the conviction was overturned, he wasn't a felon then. So he received his restoration of rights. But he's in prison, so I think that what this case shows is is the fact that there really is no check on a prosecutor continuing to try someone in this way, and that when it doesn't happen, the reason it doesn't isn't because there's any rule prohibiting it. It's because the prosecutor just doesn't, for whatever reason.
When I began listening to this podcast, I was surprised as a newspaper reporter that you were using first person to tell this story. And then as I continued to listen to it, the fact that you did use first person is what helped bring me into the story and took me back to all 11 episodes. So could you describe that, and maybe have a clip that shows that as well?
Sure. Yeah. So I do have a clip I can play, but maybe I'll set it up first. Yeah. So we use first person. Madeleine is very much in the podcast, and actually our whole team makes appearances throughout it. And I think this sounds stupid, but the basic reason for that is because that's how it was. We reported it. It would take a lot of work to get us out of that story, and I don't know why we would, because there's a drama of finding things out. It is just what happened. We found stuff out, and so there's not a good way to not have a person doing that action. So that's the most essential reason why we do it. I think also just there's sort of a connection I think you can make with your audience using the first person. That can be hard if you're a disembodied narrator, just sort of laying out the facts. So that was never a question for us that we were going to work in that style. But I think we actually in the podcast try to go a little bit further with that, and so we don't use. It's not just that we're using I, but we're also really trying to show our work in the podcast so the listener can see exactly what we're doing. And again, there's a couple of reasons for that. First, just because we think it's interesting, and second, because I think it helps the listener trust what we're saying. So we can come to you and we can say we've done this jury analysis, and Doug Evans is striking black jurors at 4.5 times the rate. But if we show you how hard it was to get that number, you trust us more, and you understand why those numbers don't exist everywhere in the world, because we've shown you just how difficult it was. So one challenge of this story was that we were looking back many years. We were looking back 2 decades, and so a lot of the records were not easily accessible. It wasn't just the jury records, but we're talking like criminal records, just like records in general were not like all sitting in a tidy repository in like a box somewhere.
Because why would that wouldn't be very much
Because that
fun?
would be no
Like,
fun at all.
Just go to an office,
Yeah.
get the documents.
So we were, at one point, for part of the podcast, we were looking into this guy named Cookie Hallman, Odell Cookie Hallman, who was the jailhouse informant who's testified 4 times that Curtis Flowers confessed to him while they were in prison together. He's like the state's star witness. And so we were trying to figure out the answer to this question, like, did Cookie get anything for his testimony? Doug Evans has always said no. Cookie never got anything. He's just doing it out of his conscience and the goodness of his heart. So we're trying to answer that question. And so one of the ways we went about answering that question is like we wanted to put together his criminal record, because we had to find out, like, is there anything weird going on in 2001 when this guy came forward and made this statement to law enforcement, supposedly out of the goodness of his heart. So we had to compile his complete criminal record to figure that out. But the problem is, if you just call all the clerk's offices, you're going to get a very partial record. So we learned that some of the records for one of the counties were being stored in this like old,
like empty jail behind the Carroll County Sheriff's Office building.
And so again, I'm going to play a clip from like Madeleine and some of our other reporters going in to try to find these records. And the reason we built this scene the way we did is, again, because I could just say to you, like, this is Odell Hallman's criminal record, but then you would ask why, like, no one else had figured this out. And it's because it requires, like, going into this jail, like I'm about to play. So this clip is a couple minutes long. Let's see if this works. All right.
This probably doesn't meet the standards of the National Archives.
The jailhouse.
Where you got the records.
We'll see. Let's see how I'll play this. This is just one of many odd places we have tracked down records for this story. This is at the jail.
Hello.
Hi.
Bring your flashlight.
That's Parker.
Some of the old cells in the Carrollton jail were filled with filing cabinets, stacked on their sides on the metal bunks. We started climbing onto the bunks to open them, looking for any criminal records that might mention Odell Cookie Hallman.
I feel like this is the sort of thing bat flies out of, don't you?
Then we noticed some smaller drawers, just lying out in the hallway. Each one was crammed full of index cards. They were booking cards for the jail.
It's like just like jammed packed in this. It's like a shoebox full of these cards, like these 5x7 cards.
We grabbed these files and hauled them over to a desk in another room. Okay, so we're looking for Odell Hallman on these cards. So where are the H's?
They're in this one.
This one?
Super packed one, yeah.
Okay, cool.
H's.
Harper, yeah, and the H's. Harper, Harris. Odell, there he is. Date of birth, 11/1975. This is Odell. Alias or nickname, Cookie. There he is.
Build heavy, complexion light.
Occupation, none. The charges, or the arrest was for aggravated assault on, the day before Christmas Eve, 12/23/92. Okay. Oh, here he is again. Odell Hallman Jr. This is from April 7th, 1993, for concealed weapon, alias or nickname Cookie. Here's another one. Odell Hallman Jr., August 14th, 1991, hold for reform school. How old is he?
16, right?
16. Aggravated assault. Here's
another one?
You guys, this just keeps going. Hallman, there he is again. Odell Hallman Jr. April 7th, 1992, simple assault. Here's another one. July 29th, 1991, aggravated assault. This guy has got so many cards.
So again, like that's not like necessary information to include per se, but like, I think it's always good in radio to like have something happening on mic, like to have like people realizing something or something happens, and like sometimes that's one of your characters, but sometimes it's like the reporter themselves or the host, like actually realizing like they literally found those records on tape.
I think one of the things that's been interesting to see, both with this season and the last one, is hopefully some of what we're doing beyond telling the story of an individual case or an individual story is helping people better understand what journalism involves. Because like, what is the actual work of journalism? And that, it involves like trying to find these records everywhere you can. That there's sort of, the low-level drama of a reporter's life, like what's in this folder, that like you can kind of get the listener to be like in that same moment with you, like I wonder what they're gonna find in that drawer. And that a lot of it is just like repetitive, but important. And so we hope that by showing that we can help people see not just how we do it and have them trust us, but also see like, yeah, this is actual work. To find all of this stuff out. And this takes time, and that's why this is important. Like, you can't do a story like this in a day or a week or a month. There is a place for this kind of longer investigative work.
So you did 11 pieces, and then you went back and just yesterday added a 12th piece, which is like a follow-up. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So our plan is to continue to cover any updates in Curtis's case. So this story is not over. Curtis is still on death row. He's still in the middle of 2 different types of appeal. And so the story is in no way over, either for us or, more importantly, for him. And so we're going to continue to cover it. But this update, we wanted to do something kind of in between, not waiting all the way for another court filing, but to kind of just quickly bring people up to speed. Because one of the things, there are a number of things that were happening and kind of that ran the range. Some people, when we were about to put this out, said like, oh, I hope it's good news. Like, I hope this update is good news. And we were just sitting there thinking, like, whatever your definition of good news is, this update does not contain it. This update is a funeral. This update is a man who went into hiding. This update is, the most positive thing that's happened, I guess, is, I don't know. So there's been some developments, but it's not like, so our listeners, I think, also kind of got that sense. Because one of the things that was interesting when the podcast came out, it's like a lot of people thought, well, when is he getting out? Like people would like email us and say, okay, well, he's getting out, right? Like, is he gonna get out like this year? And we're like, this is a man who's been tried 6 times. Like, regardless of what happens in his case, nothing is certain he will get out or not get out or anything like that. So I think the update hopefully shows that no matter what you think should happen in the case, the criminal justice system, if ever there was a case where it shows it does not move quickly, it would be the case of Curtis Flowers. And then our listeners, I think, were one of the difficult things that happened, I think that a lot of our listeners experienced with us in a lot of ways, is the fact that over the summer, after all of Curtis's case was back in the news, we've been reporting on it, the Clarion Ledger has it on the front page, and there was this feeling of hope in the Flowers family for the first, like a real sincere hope that maybe something would be different in his case. Curtis's mother died. And so we also wanted to kind of tell a little bit about that story and her funeral in the update. And she had been, like just a rock for Curtis, going to visit him every 2 weeks with her husband for 20-some years. I mean, not missing a visit. This is a woman in her 70s who has other children, and has really devoted most of her life to her son, Curtis.
Did you tell me that she was the conduit to allow Curtis to be able to know what you're doing? Because he has no device to be able to hear your podcast.
Well, we sent the transcripts to him in prison, so that's how he was able to read the transcripts. But he can't listen to podcasts in prison. Of course, we should say that some people in prison do have cell phones in our story, including this guy, Odell Cookie Hallman, who is on Facebook, and you could probably talk to him right now if you wanted to. So he was on Facebook, just chatting it.
Instagram. Not Twitter.
So if you play by the rules, no, you don't get a cell phone in prison. But
so I thought one of the unfolding dramas was the certain battle between you and the DA and whether you were going to get to talk to him. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so it was really important to talk to Doug Evans. So with a story like this, we never go into it thinking like, oh, that person who's at the center of this is never going to talk to us. Like, quite the contrary, we expect that person to talk to us and put a lot of time into how can we make sure this person talks to us, because you know, when we think about who are the people that can tell this story, well, obviously he's such a central person. We have so many questions. The problem for us was that he did not get back to us. So we tried calling and writing letters, leaving notes under his office door. I mean, a number of things, didn't hear back. And so eventually we did something that I don't like to do, and I only really do if I've exhausted all the other options in a situation like this, which is to just show up. And so we did that, and really weren't sure whether he would talk to us or not. He really hasn't talked about the case, but and so anyways, he was with someone else, and we just ended up waiting like an hour in this little lobby, and then he came out and talked to us for like 11 minutes.
You had a little clip up there. I mean,
Oh,
you've
sure.
in the trailer, he was
Yeah.
on there, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, for me, it was like, yeah, and we planned through a lot of different scenarios when we talk to people, and especially a situation like this, where the greatest challenge is I really don't know how much time he's going to give me. So, you know, he didn't invite us back to his office to sit down. We're just talking in this hallway. And the reason why our conversation ended, which is very unfortunate, is that there was a man in the office who needed like a reimbursement, like a mileage reimbursement form signed or something like that, and very legitimately like comes up the hallway and is like, Mr. Evans, I need this form signed, and you're like, no, please. You know, like, so I knew at that point like I would have like one or two questions left, and so just decided to tell him that this one part of the story that Odell Hallman had recanted his testimony to us, to see what he would make of it. And I hope that, like in a good interview, I think, in a case like this, what you want is to kind of better understand this person who's the powerful person in the story, and understand how they make decisions, how they react to things. And so I think it was really helpful to see how he reacted to that. You know, here's your star witness who's saying, I lied under oath in a death penalty case for you, the DA. And my testimony was the only piece of direct evidence. And so I didn't know what he would say. Doug Evans, when I told him this, you know, would he say, are you sure you have the right, like, Cookie Hallman, because my Cookie Hallman is telling the truth? Or, no, he didn't say that to you. He, you know, like, or can I hear the audio of him saying that? Or how many times did he tell you? When did he tell you this? You know, all kinds of different possibilities. But what he actually said was, you know, well, that's why the court instructs the jury that jailhouse informants aren't reliable. First thing, so, you know, it's a difference between like being able to have an actual conversation with someone where you're like, okay, now I'm learning something about how you view your job, how you make decisions, how you think. And so I was grateful that that man with that form that needed to be signed held off for like 30 more seconds, but he really needed it signed. So then after I asked that, and Doug Evans answered, and he's like, Doug, I really need this form signed. And he's like, okay, and then he turned away and the interview was done. So it was like the last question, but yeah, I mean, it was, we wanted to sit down with him for much longer and had contacted him after that interview, you know, trying to sit down with him. I mean, ideally what we wanted to do is we wanted to sit down and go through at length all of our findings. You know, we kind of believe in this like no surprises school of journalism. Like, we will sit down with you in an interview on the record and go through all of it. And that's an offer that we made to both sides in the case. And neither side took us up on that offer. So, but, you know, so we wanted to go through and just like in detail, you know, here, this witness told us this, what do you think of that? But he didn't want to do that. So we had to settle for this conversation. But I also would like never want to, always sort of hold out hope that someone will still talk to me. So I do still hope that he will talk to me. I mean, he's elected official, the elected district attorney. I think we've shown that we're thorough. And I think we've shown that we understand what's going on in the case, like a granular, you know, level that he should hopefully, as a prosecutor, be able to appreciate. The difference now is that, like he said, when I talked to him, you know, usually we don't have these reporters coming around asking these kinds of questions. So the difference now is that, like, this is a different dynamic now. There is more attention placed on this case that doesn't, like, from what he was telling me, he's not as used to that.
Yeah, and I think I just want to underscore that, like, we legitimately want to talk to everybody. There's like no part of us is like, this will make a good scene when we jump out at Doug Evans and like confront him with things and like yell at him in the doorway. And like, it's going to be Madeleine's big moment to like, you know,
I don't
be
think
the
I'm like
crusader.
a yeller, really,
No.
by nature.
But that's like some people do that, right?
Well, there's this term in journalism that gets used that I hate, which is like the confrontation interview, which is like, it sounds very serious, like I'm going to and surprisingly, often the subject of that confrontation interview is very withholding and defensive, and like the journalist goes around like feeling like that guy was so defensive when I confronted him. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, you confronted him. And so I think just like our style in general, and my style in these kind of situations is to just like try to bring it down a level into a kind of a normal conversation where the goal is actually a shared goal. Like, I just want to understand what's going on here. Tell me what you think's going on. Let's talk about it. And we actually have had really long, in the story we did before this one, Samara and I interviewed the sheriff in that story for more than 3 hours. I mean, his only statement at the end of it was like, that was way longer than I was expecting.
We ended the interview, yeah.
Yeah, but so that's important to us, and I do wish we could have had more time.
Right, because we've talked a lot about like using my I voice and like Madeleine as a character and all of us as characters, and that's important, but like this is not like the story of Madeleine, like
it was
discovering things.
As I said earlier, it's a judicious use of
right,
I want to let the audience join this conversation. So we'll take questions from the audience now. Right over here, I saw your hand first.
Yeah, so our recording equipment's really big, which when I first, I don't know if you know, it's a sound devices recorder and then a big microphone. Okay, so it's like very large and visible, which when I first started using this kit was like very awkward and made me feel uncomfortable. But actually, I've come to see it as a good thing because like you cannot be confused about what's going on if we show up at your door. Like if you open the door and you see me and I've got like the headphones and I've got this microphone's this big, like.
The only thing we have to do is convince you that it's actually not also a video camera.
Right, exactly.
There's like still some people in Winona who are like, when am I going to be on TV? I'm like, not from us ever, because that thing was definitely not a video camera. But it's very bulky and so how we like address, so we like make it very clear people are being recorded, and we really have a practice of recording almost everything. So
we'll walk up to the door and we will like have the kit out and visible. Like we would never do a like hidden microphone thing. That would not be something we would ever do. So yeah, we come up to the door, kit's out, we introduce ourselves, say we're reporters, and then just hopefully get invited inside.
It's very rare that actually we were very fortunate that most of the time people were okay with being recorded in the story. Yeah.
It's terrific you have all that great equipment, but for these aspiring podcasters here, it's not necessary to have that level of equipment, is it?
No, of course not. No, I mean, I think like just for people, if you have a small kit, you just keep the mic close to the mouth is basically, like we have a nice kit, but you do not need a super nice kit.
It's just like if you have a little recorder, you're recording on your phone, it might not be as clear to someone that you're recording them with your phone, you know.
Right, so like you just want to make sure they know.
Okay, question, Al?
So before we did In the Dark, I came from like an audio documentary world, so I was a reporter, but like in this really working in like really sound rich public radio style stuff. Madeleine was an investigative reporter, and so like you started like the idea to do a podcast came from the story really. So it was Madeleine telling me about the story and realizing that this was a story that needed to be told in a long form, and so this was the first time either of us I think had worked on a podcast, unless I'm forgetting something.
Unless you have a secret podcast.
A secret podcast in my bag.
Yes.
And I think it was like really exciting. For me, it was really exciting to break out of the public radio clock. You know, there's this like, if you work in public radio, there's just this very standardized, you know, 4 minutes, 7 minutes, 52 minutes. Like it's just, everything has to come down to the second. And then to work in a medium is just like, you want to make it 10 minutes, you want to make it 2 hours, like go for it, whatever the story requires. So that was just great. And also just being removed from the public radio also has a particular kind of voice, I would say, like a formality to it, which it was liberating to be able to break out of that in our storytelling. And of course, there's so many other great podcasts around that you can just listen to and be inspired by.
I think for the storytelling, that's like a question we thought about a lot, like how it has affected. It's really pushed us, I think, to the limits of our ability. I mean, of trying to tell these kinds of stories because it's so complicated. You've got like in this season, 11 episodes, and if you move like one scene out of the second episode because you want to put it in the fourth, and it's Tuesday at 10 p.m. and that's a great idea, and you're calling Samara and she's like, yeah, it's the best idea you've had in a while. You're like, yes. And then you both like talk again in the morning, and it's like we both have realized that like if we do that, we have just created this giant problem, now that we have to solve because now this other thing doesn't make sense.
7.
And so you're just like, oh, was it worth it? Is it not worth it? And then in the meantime, like someone has a different idea, which is like, what if you didn't even do episode 2 and it was really like episode 8? And you're like, that's an interesting idea. And so the amount of like versions that this goes through and like the kind of iterative process of it is really extensive. I mean, we spend like edit after edit, and then also we move things around a lot. Like we were talking earlier over lunch, like with like index cards on a wall, we do the storyboarding. That's probably one of the greatest challenges is how to sustain this narrative arc over 11 episodes. So on the one hand, we have this like great luxury, like we don't have like the clock. They don't have to be all 4 minutes, and there could be 11, there could be 14 episodes, but then you still have to impose the structure. And especially, I think for this story, what was so challenging, one of the things was just that a lot of the basic facts of the story were not that simple. So like even the fact that Curtis had been tried 6 times brings like the very immediate question of, is that even allowed?
No.
Like I have to explain that, So at every stage, it was like trying to simplify. But yeah, it was a challenge. I don't know. We've been going through and redoing the story like as an hour-long documentary that'll be like available for public radio stations, and it has been just a reminder of like how much you're trying to like jam all these pieces. And
let's go to the front row here.
So my question also is about podcasting as a medium. Like one of the things I thought was amazing, not only the dogged journalism that you're doing, but the artistry that went into the storytelling, like the episode that gets into Archie Flowers singing and how poetic that was. And also I'm curious about the relationship that you build with your audience through a podcast, because you could drop a new episode like you did yesterday and that immediately shows up on someone's phone, as opposed to them having to go get a newspaper or hear about it and go dig for that. So can we talk about just how those things might be different in a podcast than in other types of journalism?
yeah, I mean, it's so immediate. I mean, I feel that way about podcasts that I listen to. It's like, oh, they like put out a new episode, yes. It's like, there it is, and you're like excited, you can listen to it. But also you're speaking directly, like with radio in general, I mean, you're speaking directly to one person, not to like 10 people, but to one listener. And so, and most of the time you're not listening, like this isn't the 1930s where we like crowd around like the very large radio, like we're listening on our headphones or whatever. So it's a solitary experience for the most part. So it is more intimate in that way. And then I think there is something that gets talked a lot about in radio to the point where it's almost a cliche, but it is true that there's something so powerful about hearing someone's own voice telling their own story. So, the connection that people feel with the Flowers family, with Curtis's parents, is I think in large part due to the fact that they're hearing this like husband and wife who've been married for more than 50 years. This has dominated their entire life, this quest to have their son get out of prison. And here you can hear them, much more powerful most of the time than reading about it, except if you're a great writer, in which case it is just as powerful. But for most of us, it's like there is something that's so immediate. I mean, we think a lot about documentary film in this kind of way. That's a lot of what we borrow from.
And we do spend a lot of time on production, and we have our team, and then we also have engineers and composers, and it's again a situation where the format of a podcast gives you can try a lot more things that wouldn't fly on public radio, and you can be a little more indulgent, like in a way that I think helps the story. Like with the Archie thing, if you went to a public radio station and said like, and now there's going to be a 6-minute segment, which is mostly just going to be this guy singing, they would be like, no, no, thank you.
Right here on the third row.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So my question is, do you think Doug has committed ethics violations such as that the child, tampering
That's a question. Those are good questions. These are the questions, the exact questions that I like. So this very question about the ethics violation is something that when I interviewed the general counsel of the Mississippi Bar like 3 weeks ago or so, I asked him this question because it's kind of like a technical question in a way I wasn't expecting. Here, what we're talking about is in Curtis Flowers' third trial, the state Supreme Court overturns a conviction. The reason they overturn it is because they say Doug Evans violated the U.S. Constitution because he intentionally struck black people from the jury because they were black. It's called Batson violation. So I went to this man, Adam Kilgore, who's the general counsel of the Mississippi Bar, and asked him, is the Batson violation, is violating the Constitution by racially discriminating against people in jury selection, an ethics violation? In other words, something that the bar would consider. And his answer was, I don't know. This has never come up before. And so I don't think that the bar has an answer for that. What he was saying was that he's not aware of the bar receiving a Batson complaint before. So there's not even things people complain about to the bar all the time, or not all the time, but he said the most common complaints. I don't want to make it sound like lawyers are always doing these things, but he said the type of calls that he always gets are, lawyers not calling me back. I don't think my lawyer's doing a very good job. I'm not, but those are the kind of complaints they get, where they investigate, someone, is maybe not potentially stealing their client's money or something like that. They tend not to get bar complaints, he was saying, about what happens at trial, like Batson violations or Brady issues about whether the evidence is turned over. Things that are really the sort of things that to the public, to all of us, seem like very big issues, tend to not work their way into this bar system. So what you see is that the bar hasn't investigated in the most of the time the kind of core issues that the public hears about all the time. So if a prosecutor has a pattern of withholding evidence, it's usually not something bar associations get involved in. And the interesting thing to me about the bar situation, this is a little bit wonky and then I will stop, it's just that it's the Mississippi Supreme Court that is in charge of all of this. And so they give the Bar Association the ability to act as an agent of it. It's the Mississippi Supreme Court that found the Batson violation. And yet they don't have a process to automatically trigger some kind of ethics investigation. They have a completely separate part of their same body, basically, that waits for a complaint to see if Doug Evans has done the thing that they have already found that he's done, and if so, is that an ethics, they will decide if it's an ethics violation. So there's this process, and it's just, I think, now what we're in this moment is a time period where the public is asking more questions about prosecutors and prosecutorial accountability. And the bar, it sounds like, is having to really start to think about these issues because members of the public are bringing it up. And they're having to think, oh, is this something I would discipline a lawyer for? And we don't know, the bar doesn't confirm or deny whether there's any active investigations against Doug Evans. I do know that, like we reported in this update episode, that there are several people who have called the bar to see about the process of filing a complaint. But as far as what happens with that, I really don't know.
So we'll take one or two last questions. See the hand right here.
So I think that I understand correctly that at least in this season, so I haven't seen yet, it's more an investigation into the criminal justice system and the legal process more than it is a true crime podcast about
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. We're really not. It's interesting because we're grouped with all these kind of standard true crime things, but
not how we think of
ourselves.
ourselves.
And we're not. I'm the last person. I have such a. I don't even read I don't watch horror movies. There's a gruesome crime. I skip the art. Often those paragraphs. So I'm the worst person to be involved in a crime podcast of any kind. But I think that we really try to not focus in on that. But for us, what we're looking at, with season 1, we were looking at a child abduction case, and we were asking, not who did it, but why hadn't this case been solved? With season 2, we're looking at this death penalty case where we're not asking, did Curtis do this crime, or we're asking, why has this been going on for so long?
Right, because it's an accountability question.
Yeah.
Our job is to hold elected people or people in positions of power to account. So it's not to dwell on the details of crimes.
Last question.
So with the interest group now, the focus that we're getting on the prison investigation
Mhm.
So if you all look at the role, him staying in jail all the time, so that means he was denied bail or the bail is set too high, which is also a prosecutor makes these suggestions and then the judge goes with it. So what's the story behind the bail situation and how did you frame it for the role of the prosecutor?
Yeah, so as far as, according to his lawyers, because some of the records were hard to, according to the memory of his lawyers from the past, he was not ever given bail. And so that was one of the areas of the records that we were not able to find, like the paper records of all of that, but that's my understanding. We did see a lot of, like, so not so much in Curtis's case, which is the quadruple murder, but a lot of other cases that were for much lesser crimes, where people, were being given extremely high bail amounts, who we met in Winona, who had, been in the situation you're talking about, like, you can't really participate in your own defense because you're in jail, because you have an aggravated assault charge, but your bail is, what it might be for a murder charge elsewhere. But yeah, in Curtis's case, I don't think there was ever even, at least according to his lawyer's memory, the real belief that there would be a possibility he would get bail. But it's a good question, which I still to this day is like a little bit of a puzzle to me, because there are certainly many cases, murder cases in that area where bail was given. So I don't know why that was not the case for Curtis. There's also some really practical concerns, which sounds kind of terrible, but the family has a serious concern for Curtis's physical safety in Winona. So I'm not, there's certainly like a belief that like if he were to get out of prison, he couldn't live there. So it's not as though like, his options aren't great. If he got out, it wouldn't be like, at least according to his family, that they would feel like it would be safe for him to just like live at his parents' house or even live in the town, period. I mean, we talked to a victim's family member who said he was planning to kill him. So,
Madeleine and Samara are going to join us for our reception, free food, free drink, and they'll be available for other questions. But what a delightful evening this has been to celebrate such good journalism. Madeleine, Samara, thank you very much.